As I gaze up at the high autumn sky, I take each piece of laundry, smooth out the wrinkles, and hang it on the hanger.
Kate,
Hearing my husband Bob call out to me, I turn around. Fidgeting nervously, he offers me a small box.
thank you for everything. For our 30th wedding anniversary, I got you this.
The small box is wrapped in pale pink wrapping paper with a red ribbon tied around it. As I take the small box, which fits in the palm of my hand, my heart fills with joy, and I can't help but smile. Thank you. I'm so happy. Excitedly, I begin to untie the ribbon. But the moment I open the box, my mind goes blank. I couldn't believe what was inside. Without thinking, I rushed out of the house still wearing my sandals.
Wait, Kate, where are you going?
Ignoring Bob's call to stop, I kept running. I couldn't understand his actions and felt utterly betrayed. The joy and emotion I had felt moments earlier were gone, and I had no idea where they had gone. I even began to wish I could get back my past 30 years. As I ran aimlessly, I spotted a small park and sat on a bench to catch my breath. A pleasant breeze passed through, making the fallen leaves in the park twirl and dance. Once I calmed down a bit, I stared at the box in my hands. Then, raising my arm high, I aimed at the trash can. This thing. I wanted to throw away the disgusting object in my hand. My name is Kate Carter, 55 years old. I live with my husband Bob and our son Kenny. Kenny is a student and is currently in the middle of job hunting. This morning, as usual, he rushed out of the house after grabbing just a piece of toast from the table.
I'm going to be late for my interview. I'll be in trouble.
This kind of thing happens all the time, and it seems he still hasn't gotten over his habit of waking up late. As I leisurely watched Kenny from the living room, Bob muttered,
I'm worried if he'll manage in society.
"If you can do it, he'll be fine." Bob works at an advertising agency and is now a department head. When we first got married, he used to rush around just like Kenny every morning.
Did I really?
Don't pretend you don't remember. Laughing quietly, I nudged him. You should be heading out soon. If the department head is late, it won't set a good example for his team. Hurriedly, Bob pocketed his smartphone and rushed out the door. As I listened to the soft sound of the front door closing, I resumed washing the dishes. Recently, something seemed off with him. Though he didn't seem to notice or care, I had noticed him using his smartphone a lot more frequently. He brought it to the toilet and bath more often than not in the morning and at night. If it was work-related messages or reading the news, I could understand. But sometimes he would act as if he were hiding the screen from me.
Don't just peek over my shoulder.
He had even snapped at me and given me a glare. I couldn't understand why he was so upset. After finishing the dishes, I began to get ready to head out as well. I've been working as an administrative staff member at a hospital since Kenny started high school. The hospital is about 5 minutes away by bike, not far from home. My main job is customer service at the reception desk. It was a hectic time when the pandemic hit, but things have settled down now. Among the administrative staff who worked through that time, only Megan, one of my coworkers, remains. She has been my best friend since our school days. It was a coincidence that we ended up working at the same place, but she's been a great source of support. Today, I think I'll vent a little to Megan. As I packed my lunch into my bag, I muttered quietly in the empty living room. During that day's lunch break, Megan and I sat in the break room, eating lunch together, and I shared how Bob had been acting lately. Since we're the same age, it was easy to talk to her, and Megan listened intently, nodding along.
That's so suspicious.
Right? It's been like this for months. Megan continued as she took a bite of her sandwich.
Is there anything else? Like more weekend work or less conversation?
I started picking at my lunch as I tried to recall. Now that you mention it, I wouldn't say I'm particularly chatty at home, but I do share one or two things that happened during the day. Like how the onions were on sale at the store, or how our neighbor gave us some limes. Small things, really, but Bob used to listen attentively and react to every little thing. Lately, though, all I get are cold responses like, well, or, oh, okay. And he's been locking himself in his room right after dinner, sometimes for hours without coming out. At some point, he started coming home late more often and sending messages saying, I don't need dinner.
No way. But I thought Bob loved your cooking. That's hard to believe.
That's right. His proposal was something old-fashioned like, I want you to make me soup every day. That's right. He once told me my cooking was the best in the world. I've always loved cooking, but before we got married, I practiced hard to get even better. Then, just last month, something happened. Maybe it was because of the long overtime, but when he came home, he looked exhausted. Welcome home. You're late. I greeted him, but Bob had a very dark expression.
Yeah, just a little.
That night, I had made grilled zucchini, curry-flavored fried chicken, salad, and some side dishes. It was already late, so Kenny and I had eaten first.
Come on, Dad. Hurry and eat. The fried chicken's really good.
Kenny said, munching away, but Bob only glanced over. It's fresh, so it's delicious, I said, encouraging him. He sighed shortly and sat down at the table. It felt like it had been forever since the three of us were sitting at the dining table together. Bob took a bite of the zucchini, but after just one taste, he suddenly clicked his tongue.
This is awful. I'm done.
Wait, where are you going, Bob? He left his half-eaten plate and stormed into his room, slamming the door behind him. Since that day, he's hardly eaten at home. After telling Megan everything that had happened, she sipped her vegetable juice and frowned.
That's really weird.
Talking to Megan about it made me feel a little lighter that day. If I kept bottling this up, I'd probably explode sooner or later.
If anything else happens, let me know. I'm always here to talk.
I can't thank Megan enough for saying that. Thanks, and don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything from me. A few weeks passed after that conversation. Bob's attitude remained as cold as ever. I glanced at the calendar and saw our wedding anniversary was coming up in 2 days. Every year, I go all out and cook a special meal for the occasion, but this time, I was a little scared. What if he doesn't eat it again? What if he just dismisses it as terrible? Or maybe he'll say he's eating out before coming home. All these thoughts swirled around as the day approached. Both Bob and I had the day off, and Kenny was at college. Even though it was just the two of us, Bob spent the entire time glued to his smartphone. Every now and then, he'd stare intently at the screen, as if deep in thought, then quickly tap away. As I glanced at him, I continued carrying out the laundry and hanging it up. The weather was nice today, so it would dry well. As I gazed up at the high autumn sky, I took each piece of laundry, smoothed out the wrinkles, and hung it on the hanger. It's funny how this routine hasn't changed in decades. Checking the weather forecast has become a habit by now, too. Come to think of it, there's a storm approaching. I should hang out the bedding before it arrives. As I was lost in these thoughts, Bob suddenly approached me.
Kate,
Hearing his voice, I turned around. Fidgeting nervously, Bob handed me the small box.
thank you for everything. For our 30th wedding anniversary, I got you this.
The small box was wrapped in pale pink wrapping paper, tied with a red ribbon. As I took the small box, which fit in the palm of my hand, my heart was instantly filled with joy. I couldn't help but smile. For me? You remembered?
Yeah, I've been cold lately because of work, but I'm not dumb enough to forget our anniversary.
He said with a sheepish grin. Thank you. I'm so happy.
Open it. I'm sure you'll love it.
I wondered what could be inside. Excitedly, I began to untie the ribbon. As I carefully removed the wrapping, a white box appeared, and I opened the lid. What? In that instant, my mind went blank. I couldn't believe what was inside. Before I knew it, I had dashed out of the house in my sandals.
Wait, Kate? Where are you going?
Ignoring Bob's call to stop, I kept running. Why, how could this happen? These thoughts swirled in my mind as I ran through the neighborhood. Inside the box were a monogrammed handkerchief and a new cookie from a famous bakery. But for some reason, the handkerchief had the letter R embroidered on it. It wasn't my initial. And as for the new cookie inside, it was a chocolate cookie, generously covered in chocolate. The problem is, I have a cacao allergy and can't eat chocolate. I told Bob about this ages ago. He should know about my allergy. So why would he give me cookies loaded with chocolate? I couldn't understand it. He remembered our anniversary, but forgot about my allergy. How does that happen? The joy I'd felt moments before vanished, replaced by confusion and sadness that made my head spin. This wasn't just about today. Over the past few months, his behavior and words flashed back in my mind. I couldn't take it any longer, so I ran out of the house without thinking. Bob wasn't following me. I was starting to lose trust in him. When I looked up, I saw a small park and sat down on a bench to catch my breath. My heart was pounding like a drum. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. A pleasant breeze passed through, making the fallen leaves dance in the park. As I started to regain my composure, I stared at the box in my hand. Maybe it was a mistake. I thought about opening it again, but stopped myself. This thing. I raised my arm, ready to throw it away. But I couldn't. Bob's face came to mind. Slowly, I lowered my hand and gazed at the small white box. Then, I suddenly remembered that my phone was in my skirt pocket. With my free hand, I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen. Megan's face came to mind. Desperate for someone to talk to, I called her, and thankfully, she answered.
Hello? Kate, what's going on?
Megan, I need to talk to you. In a shaky voice, I told her everything that had just happened. My explanation was so scattered, I wasn't even sure what I was saying myself. Still, Megan nodded along, saying, "Yeah, yeah," as she listened. Just like when she listened to me in the break room at work.
I see. That's unforgivable. How could he do such a thing to my Kate?
Megan, on the other end of the phone, was outraged, as if it had happened to her.
Don't worry, I'm here for you. And after what he did, you don't need to stay silent.
What? Before I could ask, "What do you mean?" Megan spoke up.
You hire a private investigator to find out if he's cheating.
A private investigator? But isn't that a bit much?
You're being too soft. Mixing up his wife's initial and giving you chocolate when he knows about your allergy? From a third-party perspective, it's a clear red flag.
She was getting more heated than I was and continued.
I have a former college classmate, Mark Turner. He's a private investigator now and specializes in cases like cheating and infidelity.
I never imagined that there would be a private investigator specializing in infidelity so close to me. It felt like something straight out of a TV drama or movie, and my head spun at the thought. "So what happens if I hire him?" I asked cautiously. Megan answered without hesitation.
You'll find out if your husband is cheating. Plus, you'll probably learn who the other person is.
The other person. Just hearing that made my heart race. Could there really be someone else? It all felt so surreal, like chasing shadows.
Kate, whether or not you hire him is up to you, but I wouldn't recommend spending your days stuck in uncertainty.
She added, "As your best friend." After the phone call, Megan gave me Mark's contact information and the name of his agency, and after much deliberation, I decided to reach out. I needed to know what Bob was hiding. Later that afternoon, once I had calmed down, I returned home, where Bob looked at me with a puzzled expression.
Welcome back. Where were you?
I brushed off the question with a vague reply, acting as if everything was normal, so he wouldn't suspect anything about the private investigator. I still had laundry to hang up. Bob tilted his head, confused, but didn't seem too concerned. No questions like, "Are you sure you're okay?" or "Are you feeling sick?" were none of the usual signs of care.
You looked like you were staring at a bomb or something.
He casually threw out the comment, as if it were nothing. It wasn't easy to keep calm and act normally, knowing I had hired someone to investigate Bob's possible infidelity. But a few days later, I got a call from Mark, and we arranged to meet at a cafe to go over the findings. When he saw me, he gave a slight nod. I didn't feel confident facing this alone, so I had Megan come with me for support.
Hello, I'm Mark Turner. I've compiled the documents regarding Bob Carter for you.
Without much of an introduction, he began spreading out several documents.
To get straight to the point, your husband is having an affair.
He clasped his slender fingers in front of him, wearing a serious expression as he delivered the news. I didn't know what to say, and I simply stared at him, frozen.
We've also identified the other person. This woman here, Rachel Anderson, is a colleague who works under your husband.
He laid out a stack of photos, one by one. There were photos of Rachel meeting Bob in the car and entering restaurants. The most damning was a photo of them leaving a hotel where Bob's face was clearly visible. Seeing all the evidence laid out in front of me, I felt a pain so intense that it seemed like my chest would burst. My breathing became shallow, and the background noise of the cafe faded away. Megan was sitting next to me, nodding seriously and saying something. But I couldn't hear a word she was saying. Suddenly, Megan reached for one of the photos. It showed Bob and Rachel walking arm in arm into a bakery. The sign outside was from the same famous bakery that sold the cookies Bob had given me. The fact that there were several photos like this suggested they had visited the bakery more than once.
Kate, are you okay? You look pale.
Megan peered in with concern. What kind of expression was I making? Even Mark looked surprised and flustered.
Are you okay? You look really pale.
Confronted with reality, it seemed I had lost color without even realizing it. Well, I'm fine. By the way, I have a question, I said, trying to maintain my composure. About the photo of the two of them entering that pastry shop. Do they visit there often? Mark nodded.
Yes, it seems that Rachel really likes the pastries from this place.
Bob had gone out of his way to buy pastries from this shop for Rachel. Is this what it means to be at a loss for words due to shock? As I stared at the photo, I suddenly recalled the handkerchief. The R embroidered on it was Rachel's initial. In other words, that light pink box was a gift prepared not for me, but for Rachel. It must have been for her. I murmured in astonishment, and both Megan and Mark looked puzzled. After talking for a while longer, we left the shop. Mark bowed lightly, just as he had when he arrived, and went off in the opposite direction from Megan and me. As I walked alongside Megan, I recalled the past 30 years. When I met Bob, when we started dating, when he proposed, when our child was born. Each moment was a glorious memory. But now, it all felt like worthless trash, leaving me utterly empty. I want those 30 years back. Thinking about what my time with him had all meant made me sad. Just as I felt tears welling up, a voice suddenly called out to me.
Mom,
Looking up, there was Kenny.
I just finished my lecture, and I'm on my way home now. Is something wrong?
As people bustled by, I stood frozen, staring at him. Should I reveal the truth inside my bag? As I hesitated, Megan said,
Since we're all together, why don't we grab a bite to eat?
This was Kenny's first time meeting Megan, but he seemed to sense the awkward atmosphere and replied accordingly.
I'll go.
I entered a nearby diner, hesitating as I pulled out that document from my bag. Kenny listened carefully. With that, I revealed everything I had just learned. He was clearly shocked, but there was also a look of understanding on his face.
Well, Dad has been acting a bit strange lately.
You noticed? When I asked, he nodded slightly.
What are you going to do, Mom? Are you thinking about?
Still looking down, he seemed about to say something. What was likely floating in his mind were the words, divorce. However, I was also uncertain if I should take that option. As I struggled to respond, Kenny said,
I plan to support you, Mom, as family.
He stated clearly, despite his worry.
I'm on your side, Kate. No matter what decision you make, that won't change.
Megan also made a fist and struck a fighting pose. No matter what decision I make. Hearing those words, I felt a strong conviction that I had to settle this myself. The day after our meal together, I went to work as usual and stood at the front desk. Maybe because it was changing seasons, it felt like more people were falling ill. Just then, after the morning consultations and billing were done, the number of patients coming in significantly decreased. The front door opened, and a woman appeared. From a distance, I felt like I recognized her. I briefly looked away to prepare a questionnaire for the reception. The woman stood right in front of me at the desk.
Excuse me.
Yes. When I looked up, she quietly unfolded a handkerchief. In that moment, I felt my breath catch. The handkerchief had an K embroidered on it. Now that I thought about it, this familiar face was Rachel. I was taken aback, wondering how she knew about this place. But I decided to pretend not to know her, so as not to give away that I recognized her from the infidelity investigation. Is this your first time at our clinic? I need to get a questionnaire. However, she interrupted me, prefacing with, I know this is rude, but…
Are you the wife of Bob?
The saying goes that eyes can speak louder than words, and I couldn't forget the expression on her face at that moment. Her eyes seemed to reflect a sense of guilt directed towards me. Yes, that's me. I answered hesitantly. Then she suddenly apologized to me.
I'm so sorry.
What? I was taken aback and widened my eyes in surprise. Even the handkerchief with the K initial seemed to hang its head in shame.
I thought.
Just then, other staff members, likely alerted by the commotion, came out. It was certainly inappropriate to discuss personal matters in front of coworkers. I quickly calmed her down before making a promise. I'll see you again after work. The rest of the afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel and the handkerchief with the K initial. What could have brought her here? Why did she suddenly apologize? What was she going to say after I thought? I kept glancing at the clock while finishing my work, and when quitting time came, I hurried out of the hospital. There was a bus stop in front of the hospital, and buses connecting the station to the hospital were running. On the bench at the bus stop, Rachel sat quietly with her back straight. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. I'm Kate, Bob's wife. As I approached and spoke, Rachel jumped slightly, her shoulders trembling.
I apologize for my rudeness earlier. My name is Rachel Anderson.
Her polite tone surprised me deeply. Thinking this woman was having an affair with Bob made me feel defeated in some way. Rachel Anderson, why did you do that earlier?
Well, actually, I've been dating Bob.
She said this while looking away, clearly having difficulty with it.
Recently, he gave me a gift. I was so happy, but when I opened it, it was…
Rachel took out the handkerchief with the K initial from her handbag. It was neatly folded with no wrinkles at all.
I had heard from Bob that he was divorced.
Divorced?
Yes, so I thought he was single.
When did I say I was divorced? I was so shocked that I couldn't close my mouth. According to Rachel, they had started dating a few months ago, and Bob had told her he was divorced by that time. Being a supervisor at work, she never imagined he would lie and trusted him completely. She hadn't seen him wearing a wedding ring, nor did he act like he had a wife and kids. When she was suddenly handed the initialed handkerchief, she was terrified.
I started to think that maybe he wasn't actually divorced.
But how did you know I worked here?
I remembered him mentioning once that his ex-wife used to work here.
His ex-wife's workplace. It hit me hard to realize that I was already just a past woman in his eyes.
My favorite sweet from that pastry shop is chocolate cookies. But the gift he gave me was vanilla cookies, which also struck me as odd.
Oh, the box I received had chocolate cookies in it.
Then does that mean both the handkerchief and cookies were given to the wrong person?
That was highly likely, or rather, that was the only explanation. Finally, everything connected. By the way, Rachel had no idea I had a cacao allergy. She looked shocked and repeatedly apologized to me.
I really didn't know.
From her demeanor, it was clear she wasn't trying to cover things up or lie. She truly hadn't realized I existed. I was also shocked to be betrayed in such a way after trusting Bob. We were both victims of him. Rachel, I have a proposal for you. I shared a thought that suddenly came to mind at that moment. A few days after talking with Rachel, I was waiting for Bob to come home while standing in the kitchen. I had already made up my mind. The time when he was supposed to return was getting closer. Finally, I heard the sound of the front door opening with a click.
I'm home.
He entered the living room with a voice as heavy as before, not even trying to hide his exhaustion. I immediately spoke to him. "Welcome home. We need to talk."
Sure, but make it quick.
He tossed his business bag down and prepared to listen. I took out the small box given to me on our 30th wedding anniversary. I opened the lid and showed him the handkerchief with the R initial and the chocolate cookies, and I noticed Bob's gaze wandering slightly. "Thanks for the other day. By the way, what's this handkerchief?" I pointed at it and pressed him for an answer. Bob hesitated for a moment, but then forced a weak smile.
Well, it's just a souvenir.
"A souvenir? For what?"
Well, of course, it's a gift for our anniversary.
"But the initials are wrong. It's neither mine nor yours." I said this with a serious expression, not changing my face at all. Bob chuckled and replied,
That's not true. It's not initials. There's a brand called R.
His excuse was too flimsy. I wanted to ask what kind of brand it was, but if I did, the night would fade away. When I fell silent in disbelief, Bob seemed to think he had convinced me.
Is that enough? I'm tired and want to rest.
I felt irritation at his smile, which seemed confident of victory, and I paused. "Wait a minute, I have a guest coming over." When I called, Rachel entered the living room.
Gosh, why are you?
Bob was astonished to see her, and his face turned pale. He stared as if he were seeing a ghost, for Rachel was standing there. She furrowed her brows and stared intently at Bob. In her hand, she held a handkerchief with the K initial. "Oh, do you know each other? This is the first time I'm introducing her to you."
No,
Bob, that's not true, right? We've been in love for a long time.
Bob was at a loss for words, mouth agape. In front of him, I revealed more evidence. I spread out the documents of infidelity evidence and several photos I had compiled in a slightly larger envelope. Photos of Rachel happily entering the pastry shop with Bob. Photos of them coming out of a hotel. Photos of them enjoying a meal at a fancy restaurant. I couldn't tell how each photo appeared in his eyes. He could only stare in astonishment. When the last photo fell, he said with a pale face,
what's this?
"Hey, what's your relationship with Rachel?"
She's, well, just one of my team members at work. The idea that we're in love is a lie.
When I glanced at Rachel, a clear look of displeasure appeared on her face.
These photos are nothing. It was just a work-related meal with a meeting thrown in.
Though he spoke in a flustered manner, it was obvious he was lying. They say when people lie, they cover their mouths with their hands. Just like Bob was doing now. Really? Just a meal? I picked one photo and scrutinized it closely. Where in that photo of the two of them laughing at the restaurant could I see them discussing work? It seems like a pretty fun job, doesn't it? I pressed on, keeping my expression unchanged and remaining calm as I confronted Bob. He only continued to sweat while staring at me.
What's going on, Bob?
Rachel quietly stepped closer to him and asked,
I trusted you. So what is this?
Oh, Rachel, that's not it. She's not my ex-wife. She's just a distant relative.
A distant relative? Is this house yours then? Whose house did you come back to?
Anger began to rise on her face gradually. I thought her head might sprout horns. As for Bob, he was left sputtering meaningless words like well and He was probably desperately trying to figure out what to say to convince Rachel and me. But it was futile. He was failing to answer Rachel's rapid-fire questions.
You told me you were divorced. Explain what this is.
Divorced? Well,
He glanced at me and shrugged as if trying to evade the question.
maybe I said it, or maybe I didn't.
He avoided making eye contact with Rachel and turned away from me. He was simply trying to escape from both Rachel and me. I was fed up with his attitude, which showed no sincerity, and my anger reached a boiling point. Losing my patience, I finally spoke firmly for the first time. If you wanted a divorce, you should have just said so. I declared, striking like thunder. I didn't want to say this, but I could no longer bear waiting for his words. Then Bob replied in a clear tone, different from before.
Kate, I don't want a divorce.
He began his speech by saying to listen to him.
People are like the sweets in a pastry shop. There are classic items, and there are new and limited edition treats that come out from time to time.
Both Rachel and I listened quietly, trying hard to understand.
Even classic items and timeless sweets are undeniably appealing.
Bob insisted passionately.
That's why there are long-selling sweets.
I couldn't see where he was going with this, but I urged him to continue. So?
But sometimes you want to try something different, right?
With a smug look, he listed names of cakes and cookies. He must have learned this at that pastry shop, but I couldn't help but wonder where his argument was heading. Rachel seemed to feel the same way and glanced at me. Poor thing, she looked just as confused, with a lot of question marks floating in her mind. Hey, can you skip the names of the sweets and just get to the point? I sighed and told him. Turning toward me, Bob said,
What I mean is, besides you being at home all the time, sometimes I just want to casually hang out with someone different.
Rachel and I were both speechless at his words. What on earth is he saying? He spoke without a hint of embarrassment about something unbelievable, leaving me feeling exasperated. Rachel also directed a cold, disdainful look at him. Meanwhile, Bob wore an expression of bliss, as if he were lost in his own rhetoric. He was completely oblivious to both my gaze and Rachel's. Seeing him in such a painful state, I concluded there was no room for leniency and coldly replied, I'm going to divorce you.
Wait, divorce? Come on, that's a joke.
Do you think I'm joking? Finally, he seemed to grasp the seriousness of my intentions and knelt down, pleading.
Are you serious?
I'm really serious about this. I've been trusting you for 30 years, and I was wrong.
No, Kate, wait. Please reconsider.
Realizing my determination for the first time, he pleaded.
I understand. It's my fault for having another woman, right?
I said nothing. I simply shot him a cold glare.
Please think it over.
Bob shouted.
I'll never do this again. I promise. So please, don't divorce me.
He held my hand, but I'm not going to respond. I was wrong. I'll atone for this for the rest of my life, I swear. As he said this, he sniffled. He looked like he was about to cry. If he was going to cry and apologize, he should have thought of that before doing all this. It was already too late. Besides, Bob was making one big misunderstanding. That's not it. You really don't get it. I crossed my arms and quietly murmured, Do you remember that I have a cocoa allergy?
What?
He looked up at me, startled. I thought you would realize it eventually, but you didn't? I've mentioned it multiple times before.
A cocoa allergy? That's just a preference issue.
I felt something snap inside me. Don't joke around. Back then, you casually said, you looked like you saw a bomb. You were right. I picked up the chocolate cookies and the handkerchief I had on the table. I could no longer suppress my emotions. My insides were boiling with rage. Receiving cookies with cocoa is the same as receiving a time bomb. I wound up and threw the handkerchief at Bob. As I was about to throw the cookies too, Rachel stopped me. Bob stood there, his mouth agape, staring in disbelief at the handkerchief that fluttered in the air.
What? Am I being discarded? Rachel, you're not leaving me, right?
He gazed at Rachel with tear-filled eyes, desperately pleading. But Rachel, contrary to his expectations, shouted,
Don't you dare insult me. I've lost all respect for you, Bob. Stay away from me.
Bob looked as if he had been hit with a blunt object. He then noticed Kenny standing at the entrance to the living room. Kenny had been hiding in the shadows, witnessing everything.
Unbelievable. This traitor.
Bob could only lower his head deeply, feeling defeated as even his own son looked at him coldly. After that, we didn't have any further discussions and got divorced. Bob signed the divorce papers with a gloomy face, as if it were the end of the world. He probably understood the gravity of what he had done in his own way. We ended up selling our home, which is now listed with a real estate agency. Fortunately, there have been a few people interested in viewing it, and one of them is considering a purchase. Bob gathered his belongings and moved out quickly. He said it was painful to face me or Kenny. What a pathetic man who just keeps running away. Go ahead, feel free. I said this as I sent him off. We probably wouldn't meet again. After the divorce, Rachel and I occasionally have lunch together. On sunny afternoons, we have a late lunch and have started asking each other about our recent happenings and about Bob's situation. When the rumors of Bob's affair with Rachel spread, he began to hear whispers from other employees. When Rachel asked him for details, it turned out that he had cheated on her with someone else in the past as well.
I heard that back then. Everyone thought it was unbelievable. They couldn't believe it.
But was it really true? Rachel nodded awkwardly in response to my question. Bob really had been swapping partners while going back and forth between the same workplace and our home. Thinking about that sent a chill down my spine, making me feel genuinely sick. What kind of nerve does he have?
And then he was demoted, so now he's pretty far down the ladder.
If you think about it, it's his own fault, but I really hope he reflects on it. Rachel later quit the same workplace as Bob and started looking for a new jobs. She said it felt disgusting to be in the same space as him. Coincidentally, a position opened up at my workplace in the administration department. A temp worker had left for a new job, and I had just started recruiting. "Why don't you come work with us? You can leave on time, and it's easy to take paid leave." At first, Rachel hesitated, saying she had no experience in medical administration. However, after a few nudges, she warmed up to the idea and began working at the same place. It seems she realized she was surprisingly suited for it. Now, we stand at the front desk as colleagues. Speaking of jobs, Kenny has been doing well in his job search and has received offers from about 3 places. He's still undecided about which company to join, so he's thinking it over. In any case, he will be officially joining the workforce next spring. As a parent, I couldn't be happier that Kenny has grown this much. When I mentioned this to Megan in the break room, she laughed.
Come on, you're secretly a little sad, aren't you?
She teased, and Rachel giggled along.
You were worried about his job hunting the whole time.
Well, of course I'd be worried. That's normal. I blushed a little as I took a bite of the egg sandwiches from my lunch. Still, now that I'm alone at home, I feel like I have too much free time on my hands. Having become single, I'm considering trying something new.
Kate, you're good at cooking. Why not start a class?
A cooking class? I widened my eyes at the unexpected suggestion. I had thought about doing it in the past, but back then, Kenny was still young, and I couldn't open a class. Now, I might be able to give it a shot. Maybe I should give it a try. I set out to pursue my own happiness, stepping forward with a long-held dream.
Emily, it's urgent. My dad apparently fell at work and broke his leg. I'm worried, so I'm going back to my hometown for a while starting tomorrow to take care of him.
That was the call I received from my husband, Joe, while I was out dining. My father-in-law lives alone in a remote rural area, and he's not exactly young anymore, so it's certainly a concern. But what's going on here? Right in front of me, the father-in-law who supposedly just broke his leg finished an ultimate double cheeseburger with great vigor. He doesn't seem injured at all. I had a lot of questions, but I thought it wouldn't help to have a long conversation right now, so I just told Joe I understood. That's worrying. Got it. Could you tell me more when things settle down? My father-in-law, seeing my puzzled expression as I ended the call, spoke up with concern.
What's the matter, Emily? Who was on the phone?
Well, Joe just called. He said you broke your leg and that he's going back to take care of you for a while. My father-in-law, Bob, seemed surprised too, but after a moment he said,
I don't know why Joe would say something like that, but for now, it's better not to dig too deep.
Do you think Joe has some reason for lying?
Well, overthinking it now won't do us any good. Let's ask Joe when he gets back. For now, let's forget about it and have a drink. How about I treat you to a beer?
I don't know what to do from here, but I can't just ignore the fact that Joe lied. First, I've got to find out why he lied. My name is Emily. I moved to New York when I married Joe, who works at a trading company in the city, and we were blessed with a lovely son, Aiden. I had friends who didn't get along well with their in-laws, so I was worried about how I'd fare. But to my relief, my relationship with my in-laws was much better than I'd feared. After Aiden was born, we visited Joe's parents in Nebraska every 2 months, and they helped us with childcare. Now Aiden has grown up, graduated college, and moved out, so we don't go back as often, but we still visit every Thanksgiving and Christmas. Bob learned the trade of construction when he was young, and, even at 80, still works as a foreman. He has more apprentices who look up to him, and he always boasted it felt like his family was growing. My mother-in-law was a homemaker, tirelessly supporting him from early morning till late at night. Even as he aged, Bob's appetite never waned, and he ate as much as his young apprentices.
It's tough to cook every day.
I can still remember my mother-in-law's face, looking troubled yet somehow happy as she spoke. But a few months ago, she suddenly passed away. After her death, Bob visibly lost his energy and became withdrawn. He couldn't even muster the energy to go to work, and his apprentices voiced their concerns to me. Ever since I married Joe, Bob welcomed me warmly, even after our son was born. I was worried about leaving him alone in this state, so I talked to Joe about having him live with us. Joe, your dad has been down since your mom passed. I think it'd be good if he lived with us.
Yeah, he's already 80. Maybe this is the right time for him to retire and take it easy.
Joe agreed, so I planned to bring it up with Bob when the moment was right. But a few days later, Joe told me he'd been offered a promotion at work.
Emily, listen, I've been promoted to manager starting next month. It'll mean more work and more business trips. I know it'll put more on your plate, but I'll do my best.
He had rarely come home on time before, and now it seemed he was going to be even busier. I'm not as young as I used to be, and to be honest, I'm a bit worried about caring for Bob alone. His promotion was great news, a result of Joe's hard work. I wanted to support Joe as he spoke so excitedly. In the end, months passed without me being able to bring up the idea of living together with Bob. Joe successfully became the manager and got busier than expected. As I had feared, he came home even later. Sometimes he'd come back after I'd already gone to bed. Weekends, too, were taken up with business golf or trips, so Joe spent less time at home. I felt bad for my father-in-law, but I knew I couldn't take care of him alone in this situation. Telling myself it was for the best not to raise the idea and burden him, I pushed the thought away. About a year had passed since my mother-in-law passed away when I got a message from Bob.
Sorry for worrying you for so long. I've recovered and went back to work quite some time ago. Now I'm working energetically with my apprentices.
Reading those words, I felt relieved and suggested visiting him at his place for the first time in a while. However, he said he had decided to take a break from work for a bit and wanted to come here to relax, so we decided to go out for hamburger at his request. Since Joe's promotion, I'd gotten used to eating alone, so I was excited to have someone to dine with for a change. When Bob showed up at the station where we had arranged to meet, he was completely well and I was touched. We went into a nearby diner and were happily reminiscing about my mother-in-law and talking about work when my phone rang with a call from Joe. I wondered what it could be and answered the call.
Emily, it's urgent. Dad apparently fell at work and broke his leg. He can't work for a while, and he seems unable to manage daily life either, so I'm worried. I'll be going back to his house tomorrow to take care of him.
What is he talking about? My father-in-law just finished a huge double cheeseburger right in front of me with great energy. We had walked to the restaurant from the station, and he showed no signs of being injured. And for someone whose parents supposedly got injured, Joe didn't sound all that panicked. I had a lot of questions, but I knew a long conversation right now wouldn't help, so I just told Joe I understood. That's worrying. All right, go ahead and be with him. Could you let me know more details when things settle down?
Yeah, of course. I hate to trouble you, but his doctor said it will take 2 months to heal, so I'll have to leave you alone for a while.
Joe replied as if he was unaware of how I felt. I'm out right now, but I'll pack your things when I get home. When I said that, Joe sounded somewhat flustered.
Oh, right, you're not home now. Well, there's no need to rush back. I'll pack and leave tonight.
What is Joe hiding? Seeing my anxious expression after hanging up, Bob spoke up with concern.
What's the matter, Emily? Who was on the phone?
Well, Joe just called. He said you broke your leg and that he's going back to take care of you for a while. Bob also looked surprised, but after thinking for a while, he said,
I don't know why Joe would say such a thing, but for now, it's best not to pry.
Does Joe have some reason to lie?
Well, something's not quite right. But let's wait and hear it from Joe when he gets back.
The uneasy feeling wouldn't go away, but I was glad Bob was with me. If I were alone, I might not have been able to handle this anxiety.
Well, thinking about it now won't change anything. For today, let's just have a drink and forget about this. How about I treat you to a beer?
I felt like I was making Bob worry instead. I chuckled awkwardly, accepted his offer of beer, and downed it in one go. The bitterness spread through my mouth, washing away a bit of my unease, and I felt slightly better. After a few more drinks, we both ended up happily tipsy and headed home. When we arrived, the house was dark. Joe had already left. Seeing the dark room, I felt the alcohol leave my system. Even though I'd asked him to let me know when things settled down, I hadn't heard from Joe since. Bob said he had some reasons that prevented him from returning to the countryside for the time being, so he decided to stay at our place until Joe returned. He didn't say it, but I think he was worried about me since I still looked so uneasy. After I got used to having Bob around, Joe finally contacted me to say he was coming home. As I vaguely realized that 2 months had passed, I had a bad feeling and felt uneasy about facing Joe alone, so I asked Bob to watch over us from the room next to the living room. Joe came home at 9 p.m. Welcome back. How's Dad doing? It must have been tough with work and all.
Work's finally settled down. As for Dad,
Joe spoke with his eyes cast downward. I held my breath, waiting for what he'd say next.
actually, Dad's leg healed, but it seems his injury was worse than I thought, and now he can't walk properly. So he's going to a care facility, and I'll need to visit him often, going back to his place.
Before Joe could finish, the door to the next room swung open.
Joe, what are you talking about? I didn't break my leg, nor did I hear anything about going to a care facility. I've been here with Emily this whole time for the past 2 months. Where have you been going without me at home?
Bob scolded Joe with intense anger.
Dad, what are you doing here?
Joe, who hadn't expected to see his father there, was left speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish.
Emily, you tricked me.
Joe, ignoring his own lies, lashed out at me.
Joe, I don't know why you use me as an excuse to lie, but yelling at Emily is not right, is it?
Stay out of this, Dad. This is between me and Emily. And why are you even here?
Though Bob stepped in to defend me, Joe's anger was still directed at me. I heard that Bob's house was leaking badly and undergoing renovation. He wanted to do it himself, but his apprentices insisted on helping him. When you called me saying he'd broken his leg, I was actually with him.
Gosh, then why didn't you say you were with him then?
Joe, weren't you the one who lied first? You haven't been home for 2 months, but if you'd come back even once, you might have noticed.
I mean,
Joe was finally at a loss for words. Then Bob pushed further. Where have you been for the last 2 months? I never received any word from the apprentices that you came back.
Well, actually, I was at Aiden's place. He had something he needed to talk about that he couldn't tell Emily. I had no choice but to say I was going to Dad's.
Joe piled on another lie.
It was obvious this was a lie too, and I had a reason to know that. I was about to confront Joe's shameless excuses in front of his own father when Aiden came home.
I'm back. Wait, Dad? You're here?
Aiden, why are you here?
Aiden came back because he was worried about me and Bob living alone. He stayed with us for the 2 months you were gone.
Aiden, Joe said he was at your place for the last 2 months. Did you ever get any notice of that?
Huh? No, Dad never said anything about coming over. Besides, I have my house keys with me, so he couldn't get in anyway.
Aiden's testimony sealed the matter. Joe couldn't escape the truth now. He was backed into a corner.
No, I was definitely at Aiden's. You guys are just misunderstanding. You're all plotting against me.
Seeing Joe ranting nonsensically, I felt strangely calm and showed him the screen of my phone. It displayed pictures of a young woman and a newborn baby. Do you recognize this woman?
Well.
Joe's face turned pale. It seems you were indeed at our son's place for 2 months, but this isn't our child. I didn't want to say this in front of Aiden, but were you cheating on me?
She's just my coworker. If you're saying I had an affair, prove it.
Joe brazenly demanded. I slapped down the disturbing emails I'd received in front of Joe. This is the proof of your affair with this woman. My phone displayed numerous messages from Joe's mistress.
I'm the one Joe really loves. Just leave him. Even at work, Joe is all over me. Joe said he prefers a young and beautiful woman like me over an old, wrinkled wife. The baby was born the other day. Looks just like Joe and me.
Although the messages didn't include any pictures of the baby, they mentioned habits and physical features of Joe that only I, his wife, would know, making it impossible to dismiss them as just the mistress's fantasies. She probably thought that if she had a child, I would divorce Joe.
Dad, were you lying and having an affair when Mom and Grandpa were going through so much?
Joe, you even have a child?
No.
Unable to bear it anymore, Joe grabbed only his wallet and phone and bolted out of the house. An awkward silence hung in the air, but Aiden and Bob spoke up in bright voices.
Well, Mom, you haven't done anything wrong. Let's just forget about today and get some sleep.
That's right. Aiden's right. Emily, let me handle the cleanup today.
Grateful for their kindness, I decided to turn in early for the night. However, the next day, a heap of nasty letters from Joe's mistress arrived. The mailbox was overflowing with paper, scribbled messily with hateful words.
Don't think you can just panic now that Joe's about to dump you. Don't be jealous just because you're not the one he loves. Why don't you face reality and just give up? Stop clinging to your high-earning husband and get a divorce now.
There was no sender's name, but it was clear who had written them. There were at least 30 letters. Apparently, after Joe stormed out of the house yesterday, he went to his mistress's place. He must have lashed out at her for contacting me. It seemed like the mistress was desperate to justify herself, unable to accept being scolded by Joe. I didn't want to further exhaust myself over something that wasn't my fault. When I consulted Bob, he advised me to contact a lawyer, so I went straight to a law office. After consulting with the lawyer, it was decided that we would demand alimony from both Joe and his mistress, inform the mistress that any further communication must go through the lawyer, and ignore any attempts to contact me directly. But the next day, Joe and the mistress showed up at the house together. It seemed they were upset about the demand for alimony. Ignoring the instruction to go through the lawyer, they barged into my home.
Who do you think has been putting food on the table all this time while you've been just a housewife with no job? If you want to demand alimony from us, I won't be sending you any money for living expenses from now on.
Joe tried to use money to threaten me, but in reality, he hadn't contributed to living expenses at all during the 2 months he was supposedly back home. During that time, we had been living off Bob's and my savings, but with Aiden grown up and having moved out, I was thinking it might be time to start up part-time jobs. It didn't matter if Joe stopped sending money. We could manage our lives on our own. Understood. I don't need the living expenses, so I'll go ahead with the alimony claim. Joe seemed taken aback by how easily I agreed, but still unwilling to pay alimony. He hesitated for a moment before saying,
Have you forgotten what I've done to raise Aiden? You couldn't have sent him to college on your own.
It's true that Joe's earnings allowed Aiden to go to college, but I handled all the support at home. Joe hadn't raised Aiden by himself. I didn't mind being criticized, but when it came to child rearing, I had my pride. Being told that I couldn't have properly raised Aiden without him shattered that pride. I bit my lip in frustration, and Bob yelled at Joe in my defense.
You didn't raise him on your own. Aiden grew up well because Emily was there to support him. And if you're going to boast about raising your kid, remember that it's thanks to me that you grew up to be who you are. But I sure didn't raise you to be a cheater.
Joe, who was now being scolded by his parent in front of his mistress, couldn't say a word and hung his head. His mistress, standing next to him, tried to defend him.
Wait a minute, Bob.
However, Bob shot back, "You have no right to call me by my first name," leaving both of them hanging their heads in shame. Seeing this, I placed the completed divorce papers in front of Joe. I had thought about divorcing him when the mistress contacted me. If Joe had admitted to his affair and shown genuine remorse, I would have considered giving him another chance. But instead, he lied on top of lies, and then had the nerve to lash out at me. I was already prepared. Joe hadn't expected a divorce and quickly tried to defend himself.
Emily, please reconsider. It was just a moment of weakness. I don't care about this woman. I'll make it right, and we can keep going as a couple.
Hearing this, the mistress standing beside him flew into a rage.
Wait a minute. What are you saying? You promised you'd leave her and be with me. You said you couldn't see her as a woman anymore. Are you telling me you lied to me too?
It was a momentary lapse. I never intended to be with you.
But we already have a child. What are you going to do about this?
I couldn't afford to have them start fighting here. Joe refused to sign the divorce papers no matter how many times I asked, but eventually Bob told him to sign it, so he reluctantly picked up a pen. Slowly, he filled in the necessary details, and after making sure everything was completed, I kicked Joe and his mistress out of the house. However, the two showed no intention of leaving. Joe was banging on the front door, begging to be let in, while the mistress yelled at him loudly.
Emily, let me in. Listen to me.
Hey, we're not done here. How dare you trick me? I'm going to sue you for marriage fraud.
Hearing their loud commotion at the front door, Bob called the police, as it was becoming a disturbance to the neighbors. A few minutes later, hearing the police sirens, the two finally realized they were in trouble and fled the scene. Bob and I looked at each other, relieved as we glanced at the now quiet front door. After that, Joe kept trying to contact me to reject the divorce, but I ignored him and submitted the divorce papers. I then had my lawyer demand alimony again, and when Joe still refused, I told him, "If you refuse again, I'll take you to court. In that case, I'll have your salary garnished." Finally, he seemed to give up and agreed to pay the alimony. Perhaps Joe feared that a midlife divorce would damage his reputation at work, especially now that he had been promoted to manager. He was a very proud man. 3 months passed after our divorce, and I received several calls from Joe. Even after all this, he still couldn't follow the instruction to contact me through my lawyer. As I was about to turn off my phone to ignore him, another call came in. Of course, it was from Joe. Not wanting my call log to be filled with missed calls, I decided to answer. "Hello, what do you want now?"
Emily, someone I don't know is living in my family home. What's going on?
It seemed that Joe had been abandoned by his mistress and had nowhere to go, so he decided to return to his family home. But when he got there, he found strangers living in what he thought was his house, and they turned him away. "Oh, remember when I said your dad's house was undergoing repairs due to severe leaks? Well, the repairs are done, but after living with us, your dad felt it would be too much to live alone in the countryside. So he decided to sell the house and move in with me."
What? I wasn't told about this. You sold my house without my permission.
Joe yelled in rage, but I calmly replied, "If you'd actually returned to the family home even once, you would have noticed the renovations and the sale. You didn't notice because you were lying. This is your own doing. Also, when you say my houses, it was actually built in your dad's name. Since he agreed to sell it, there was no issue." I hung up the phone before Joe could respond. Soon after, I got a letter from the mistress. She ignored the directive to contact me through my lawyer and sent the letter directly to me. It was full of self-centered claims that she was the victim, arguing it was wrong for me to demand alimony from her and that she should be the one asking for it. Considering all the vile messages she had sent me before, it was outrageous for her to play the victim now. I ignored her demands and sent her a folder containing all the emails she had sent. "This is what you did. Face reality and pay the appropriate alimony." I also informed my lawyer, who warned both Joe and the mistress not to contact me directly again. One day, after some peaceful time had passed, I received a message from the mistress's parents. I was tired of dealing with this mess, but they said they wanted to apologize for what had happened. They were her parents, after all. Even if they claimed to apologize, they might become upset. Worried, I consulted Bob and arranged to meet with them later, with my lawyer present. At a cafe, the mistress's parents were already seated, and unlike their daughter, they were serious and sensible people. They apologized to me profusely. Well, what happened to them after that? Since I hadn't heard from Joe or her since then, I asked her parents, They exchanged awkward glances before explaining what had happened. According to them, the mistress had barged into Joe's family home. However, the person living there was a complete stranger, and, like Joe, they were surprised by the visit. The resident, suspicious of being approached by strangers, consulted the police. Afterward, the police patrolled the area, and the mistress, who was lingering around the house, was caught and questioned. In the end, Joe and the mistress were released on the condition that they would not return to the area. But later, while investigating where Joe was living, the mistress discovered that he had been kicked out of both his home and his family house and was now living alone in an apartment near his company. The mistress barged into his apartment, resulting in a loud argument late at night. The mistress, who was supposed to be on maternity leave, stormed into the company in a furious rage, loudly talking about their affair and demanding alimony and child support, causing an uproar. As a result, Joe lost the trust of the company, was demoted from his managerial position, and is now treated like a pariah by everyone. She also was fired for causing a disturbance at the company, and feeling overwhelmed with the care of her child, she returned to her parents' home. Her parents learned the full story of what happened and came to apologize to me. Despite the incident, she was still their beloved daughter. The exhaustion was evident on their faces as they spoke of their intentions to care for their grandchild and firmly discipline their daughter. The mistress's parents were much more decent and kind than I had expected, and since they apologized profusely and paid the alimony on her behalf, we agreed to have no further involvement in the matter and ended the meeting that day. 3 months after meeting the mistress's parents, I received a request from Joe through my lawyer to reconcile. I wanted to cut off contact entirely, but since Joe hadn't yet paid the alimony, I checked the message. Apparently, Joe couldn't handle the cold stares from his coworkers and jumped at the chance to take early retirement when it was offered last month. He mentioned that he was currently job hunting but was sure he'd find work soon, promising that he had learned his lesson and would help around the houses more and take care of Dad, pleading for reconciliation. If Joe had truly been remorseful, he wouldn't have turned defiant when the affair was discovered. He wouldn't have angrily contacted me when he found out the family home had been sold. I couldn't trust Joe's words anymore. He'd likely only learned his lesson temporarily, and after a while, he'd probably repeat the same mistakes. Besides, if he'd taken early retirement, he must have received a large sum of money. I wanted to get the alimony paid quickly and move on, so I declined Joe's request and demanded he pay the alimony. Unwilling to give up, Joe once again violated the order to go through the lawyer and showed up at my houses that night.
Emily, please reconsider. I've reflected on everything. That woman, she's 32, and when younger women started joining the company, she stopped getting all the attention and turned to me. I tried to turn her down at first, but I never thought she'd get pregnant. I was a victim too.
Joe, crying and shifting the blame to others, disgusted me.
The only person I love is you, Emily. Please, let's start over. I'll do all the housework, even care for Dad. We can take Aiden on trips on our days off.
He hadn't paid the alimony, hadn't found a new job, yet he could easily imagine a bright future. I felt no sympathy for Joe, who was desperately bowing his head. I've had enough. Pay the alimony immediately and leave.
Emily.
At that moment, Aiden appeared, having heard the commotion.
Dad, stop it. After everything you've done, it's too late to think you can just come back.
Joe, feeling his pride wounded by his son's words, yelled at Aiden.
Aiden, stay out of this. This is between your mom and me.
Hearing Joe shout at Aiden, Bob finally emerged from the back room.
Joe, how dare you speak like that? Not only have you troubled Emily, but you've also caused problems for Aiden. Do you even realize how many people you've hurt?
Having reached the point of no return, Joe began to cry and scream.
This is my house. If you want me out, then you all leave.
Hearing this, Bob went back to the room and returned with some documents.
This house was built when you got married. Here's the property registry. It's in my name. This isn't your house. Now leave.
Unable to say anything in response, Joe left the house, crying and shouting. After repeated demands from the lawyer, the alimony was finally paid. Since then, Joe hasn't contacted me, and I've started working part-time, living peacefully. I suggested that Bob continue living with me, but he refused, not wanting to be a burden, and rented an apartment nearby. He arranged for the house ownership to be transferred from his name to mine, and now I live alone. Sometimes I feel lonely, but in those moments I visit Bob, who lives nearby. He chose the nearby apartment so I could be there quickly if something happened, but I find myself visiting even when nothing is wrong. On Aiden's days off, the three of us go out together. Recently, he's even started using care services. However, the care workers often remark that he hardly seems to need it, as he remains as energetic as ever, eating hearty meals that rival those of much younger people. Today is our monthly dinner outing with Bob, Aiden, and me. As I waited at the station, I saw Bob waving as he approached.
Hey, Grandpa's here.
Aiden waved back at him. You look as energetic as ever, Bob. I'm glad.
I can't let the young folks beat me just yet.
I asked Bob, who was laughing heartily. What shall we eat today?
Let's see. I'm in the mood for a big hamburger.
Sounds good. I'll go for a mega hamburger too.
Aiden and Bob started walking toward the diner. I glanced up at the sky and saw a clear, cloudless blue. I never imagined that I'd go through a divorce in my 50s. I thought infidelity was something that only happened in TV dramas. I was deeply saddened. I felt a lot of pain and frustration. But still, I have my irreplaceable family supporting me. I'm sure that the rest of my life will be as clear and bright as this sky. Wait up, you two. With a light heart, I chased after them.
Mom, hey, Mom, wake up.
I was suddenly shaken awake, and my eyes barely opened to see my daughter's anxious face looming in my blurry vision. I slowly sat up and asked her, "What's wrong with you? Did you have a nightmare?"
No, Mom, please. We need to run away from Dad now. Hurry?
What? With that single word, my groggy mind snapped to alertness. What followed was a shocking revelation from my daughter that left me dumbfounded. My name is Sarah. I'm a 35-year-old ordinary woman who works while raising my 7-year-old daughter. Emily, our precious gem, is not only adorable but a bit unusual, or rather has some mysterious aspects.
Mom, you're forgetting your umbrella.
What? The weather forecast for that day was partly sunny with clouds. Despite the thick clouds, there were patches of blue sky. I was stopped by my daughter as I was about to leave the house before her. It's fine. There's only a 10% chance of rain today.
But Mom, you're going to get soaked. I saw it in a dream. Please take an umbrella with you.
Reluctantly, I took the umbrella she handed me and headed to work. No way. I encountered a sudden downpour just before I was about to return home. I was surprised and came home drenched, only to be proudly greeted by my daughter, whose umbrella was also wet on the stand.
Welcome home, Mom. See, it happened just like I said.
Emily has had this slight mysterious power since she was very young, accurately predicting the weather and dinner menus. It might be an exaggeration to call it a precognitive ability, but it's unusual. She sometimes feels out of place because of this trait when playing with friends, but she doesn't seem to mind. Above all, we, her family, have accepted this as part of her uniqueness. And she's otherwise a perfectly normal, adorable girl. What concerns me more is my husband, Mike, who is the same age as me. We met through a marriage agency. Back then, I was a hard-working career woman. I was successful but inexperienced with relationships. Urged by my impatient parents, I registered with the agency. It might be odd for a wife to say, but Mike was even more handsome back then and instantly charmed me. Moreover, he was a feminist, and I instantly fell in love. Our relationship quickly progressed with marriage in mind. My husband and I have been married for 10 years this year. He always comes home late these days. Emily is only 7 years old, and she still requires a lot of care. Juggling her care, household chores, and work without Mike's help has been overwhelming.
Everything costs money these days, and we need to save as much as we can for Emily's sake. You never know what might happen, so I'm working hard.
That's what he said when I asked him about it. I can't argue with him when he says it's for Emily's sake. I've been overwhelmed with work, household chores, and solo parenting. Then, one day, Mike came home early, looking extremely tense. Sensing the mood, I sent Emily away before asking, "What's wrong? Did something happen?"
Actually, I want to quit my job.
What? It was completely unexpected. After putting Emily to bed, we talked, and it turned out he's been struggling with workplace relationships and no longer finds his job fulfilling, making it a pain to go to work.
Don't blame me. I just can't take it anymore. Once things settle down, I'll find another job right away. Until then, I'll take care of everything at home.
I didn't want him to quit, but forcing him could lead to worse outcomes. I see. All right. Reluctantly, I agreed to his request. Before long, I got serious about my job, and my husband became a stay-at-home dad. His way of doing household chores and cooking was, to put it mildly, a bit sloppy compared to when I did them. What particularly bothered me was the meals. I came home around 9 o'clock in the night when my daughter went to bed and ate my husband's homemade food, but there was a lot of fried food and the seasoning was surprisingly strong. So I always needed water. The first time I ate it, I couldn't help but confront him. "What is this? You didn't feed the same thing to our daughter, did you?"
No, I made sure to prepare something with lighter flavors for the kid. And I kept the portions appropriate. I thought you'd appreciate something with a bit more flavor after a long day.
Too much fried food, not enough vegetables, and the soup barely tastes like anything. I'd be fine with the lighter seasoning for kids, and I wish you'd pay more attention to balancing the meals. Despite my repeated comments, the seasoning and menu hardly changed. If I tried to leave anything uneaten, he'd say,
I'll save it for our daughter to eat tomorrow.
"That's a joke. I'd rather eat it myself than let our daughter have it." Reluctantly, I'd finish my meal, and as an apology, he started offering dessert after dinner. He also began preparing a nightly drink and snack, calling it a nightcap set, thinking it would please me. I hadn't been much of a drinker or late-night snacker before, but I couldn't outright reject his kindness. I appreciated his efforts in cooking and his attempts at being a good house husband. So I generally turned a blind eye, enjoying the break from household chores. About 6 months into my role as the primary breadwinner, I finally had a day off with absolutely no plans. However, I felt off from the morning and lay down feeling foggy. Lately, I've been feeling lethargic without any fever and suffering from headaches. I'd fall asleep right after eating. Maybe I've been overdoing it at work. Luckily, my husband took our daughter out to a nearby large shopping mall, promising to contact me if anything came up. I was grateful for his thoughtfulness, allowing me some much-needed rest. Feeling grateful to my husband in my heart, I was dozing off.
I'm back.
I woke up to the sound of the front door and my husband's voice. I realized that it was already evening. I had slept through the day without having lunch since before noon. Welcome back. Sorry, honey, I couldn't play with you today. Did you have fun? I asked our daughter, holding a palm-sized character mascot she must have gotten while out. But she nodded quietly, looking down, unlike her usual self. I tilted my head, puzzled by her unusual behavior. What's wrong? Did something happen?
Maybe she's just tired from walking around all day. You should take a shower and rest early, okay?
My husband gently placed his hand on our daughter's shoulder, and she nodded slightly before heading to her room. When she was out of sight, I quietly asked my husband, "Hey, she seemed a bit off. Did you scold her or something?"
No, I didn't do anything. I think she's just tired. Anyway, about dinner.
I tensed up at his words. I was frankly fed up with his cooking. About dinner, I'll cook tonight. I've had a restful day and feel energized.
Oh, okay, then. I'll prepare the nightcap. I even bought dessert as usual.
He smiled, lifting a bag that clearly had the logo of a famous cream puff shop. Let's make tonight's meal low-calorie and good nutritious. Later, we had dinner together and decided to sleep together for the first time. Though she smiled when it was just the two of us, I could tell she was anxious and wanted to spend as much time together as possible.
Mom, I have something to say.
In the privacy of our bedroom, wrapped in blankets, my daughter whispered in a voice so faint I almost missed it. What is it?
Please don't drink any alcohol at tonight.
What? Could this be another instance of her slight precognitive ability? Nodding in response to my daughter's serious gaze, she closed her eyes, seemingly reassured. And so, before my husband could prepare our nightcap, I went to bed and decided to sleep early. Surely, he wouldn't go as far as to wake me up for a drink. If he tries to wake me, I'll just pretend to be asleep. With that thought in mind, I closed my eyes.
Mom, hey, Mom, wake up.
I was suddenly shaken awake, and my eyes barely opened to see my daughter's anxious face looming in my blurry vision. I realized I had actually fallen asleep, my vision blurry as my daughter's anxious face came into view. Checking the bedside clock, I saw it was 2 a.m., and I noticed my husband, who should have been sleeping next to me, was absent. Maybe he went to the bathroom. Slowly sitting up, I asked her, "What's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?"
No, Mom, please. We need to run away from Dad now. Hurry?
What? That single word snapped me out of my grogginess. What did she just say? Asking her quietly, still in shock. Why? Why would you say that?
This is our chance while Dad's not here. Because if we don't, something bad's going to happen to you, Mom. Like getting sick or an accident.
What do you mean? As I stared dumbfounded, My daughter, unable to hold back any longer, started to cry. Holding her in my lap and gently stroking her trembling back, she gradually calmed down and began to speak. According to her, while returning from the restroom at the mall, she overheard her dad on the phone. Having always been told not to interrupt when someone is on the phone, she approached quietly.
Dad was saying, just a little longer, and she'll be gone. Planning to make it look like an accident or illness. Once that's done, we can be together with the insurance money.
Who was he talking to?
I don't know. At first, I thought it was you, Mom. But it wasn't. Because, Dad, he was saying bad things about you, and he said I love you to the person.
If this was true, my husband was planning to send me to my demise. Besides, my husband is having an affair. My daughter was sobbing and continued.
He said I love you to someone not Mom. I was so shocked, I accidentally called out to Dad. Then Dad immediately ended the call and asked, how long have you been there? When I said just now, he smiled and said, let's keep this our little secret from Mom. If you don't tell, you'll get a new, kind, and sweet mom.
Tears and snot streaming down her face, she clung to me.
But, I want you. I don't need another mom. I love you so much.
She wailed, clinging to me. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for putting her through this, and anger towards my husband. My daughter had braved her fears to protect me from her own father. How scared she must have been. How much courage she must have needed. Afterwards, holding my daughter, we went downstairs to the entrance. The moment I noticed my husband's favorite shoes were missing, any slight trust I had in him vanished alongside my daughter's words. According to her, this wasn't the first time he had left in the middle of the night. She had seen him leave several times when going to the bathroom. How had I never noticed before? Even in deep sleep, if my daughter rarely wakes up at night and had seen him leave multiple times, it must have been frequent. My daughter was gripping the hem of my dress tightly. Her actions made me realize there was no time to doubt my husband. That's right. This is not the time for that. I need to respond to my daughter's courage. Perhaps because I hadn't drunk any alcohol, I felt more alert and clear-headed than usual. Looking into my daughter's eyes, I said, Emily, if we run away from Dad now, we might never see him again. Will you still come with me?
Yes, I'm scared of Dad. I want to be with you, Mom. I want to stay with you forever.
All right. I made up my mind. Fortunately, my daughter was in the middle of her summer vacation. I told her to pack what she needed, and I quickly packed our bags as well. And then, I was stunned as I checked the contents of the drawer where I kept our valuables. Opening another drawer that I rarely open, my suspicion was confirmed. A surge of anger rose within me, but for now, leaving was the priority. We hurriedly left the house before dawn and decided to seek refuge at my parents' house. My parents were surprised to see us arrive so early in the morning, but they kindly welcomed us after showing them what I found just before leaving and explaining what my daughter had told me. After the day had fully dawned, I sent a casual message. My mom got hurt. I'm taking my daughter to help out for her a month or so. Please take care of the house while we're gone.
Got it. Leave everything here to me.
He was surprisingly calm about his daughter and wife disappearing overnight. Surely, he must be smirking, thinking he can now do as he pleases alone. I'll lay low for now, but I won't let this go, for my daughter's sake. As soon as we arrived at my parents' house, my daughter, still with tear stains on her cheeks, fell asleep. Looking at her sleeping face, I made a certain phone call. About a month after taking refuge at my parents' house, I decided to return to our home, leaving my daughter with my mom. I entered the living room after unlocking the door, my smartphone in my chest pocket. My husband, who had been holding his head in front of his smartphone, gave me a forced smile as if nothing had happened.
Oh, welcome back. Don't just come back suddenly like that. You surprised me. Oh, how about I make you a nice iced coffee with lots of milk and sugar?
If it were the old me, I might have been deceived, but not today. I don't need it. Instead, I want you to write this. I confronted my husband, who was about to head to the kitchen with divorce papers. He sighed deeply after glancing at them.
Divorce, huh? Well, if that's what you really want, I'll agree.
His reaction was expected, but it infuriated me. He casually accepted it with a smile.
I'll agree to the divorce since you're the one asking for it, but you'll meet my demands for the settlement, right?
What are you talking about? You're the one who'll be paying.
What?
My husband looked puzzled. He shook his head unwillingly with a forced smile.
Come on, I've been supporting you in my way, and now you're handing me divorce papers unilaterally.
A good husband. The kind that skips work for affairs and plans to put his wife in danger?
What are you talking about?
I couldn't help but snort at his dumbfounded face. I pulled out a small bottle filled with pills from a drawer I hardly use and showed it to him. The label read, "For stubborn insomnia, 1 pill for a good night's sleep."
I bought it because I couldn't sleep well.
It's obvious if you look at it. The amount hasn't decreased since I left. I opened and took pictures of everything before I left. Want me to compare?
Don't talk nonsense. Besides, where's the proof that I gave those to you?
Everything you've been doing with your mistress. I know all about it.
What?
I returned to my seat with the bottle in hand, pulling an envelope from my bag and spilling its contents. My husband froze in shock. No wonder. Those were printouts of messages he had sent to his mistress. It says things like, "I'm skipping work to see you. Wait for me."
I quit my job so we can talk more. Love you. I got something that'll make sure she won't wake up. I can visit you during that. Think we can be together soon. Wait for me, my princess.
He sent this kind of message. Every lie about working late and his plans to make my demise look like an accident or illness were detailed. Thinking back, the meals he prepared for me were high in salt, fat, and even sugary desserts. It's no wonder my health declined. Plus, he probably tampered with my drinks while I took a shower. I didn't drink often, so I didn't notice. But when I drank the same thing at my parents' house, the difference in taste was shocking and confirmed my suspicions. I started feeling unusually tired after beginning to eat your meals. I never felt refreshed despite falling asleep quickly. No wonder with alcohol in these pills. Mixing them is the worst. Imagine what could have happened. My husband's face turned pale as his eyes darted around.
How come you have this stuff? Don't tell me you snooped through my phone. That's a violation of privacy.
No, I got it from her, your mistress.
What?
I flipped over a second envelope to show him, and his face went white. No wonder. The scattered photos showed him getting cozy with a young woman. Right after returning to my parents' house, believing my daughter's words, I contacted a private investigator to track my husband's movements. He probably never imagined I'd doubt him. Not even 3 days after we left, he was bringing his mistress into our house, living as if they were newlyweds. It was easy to find out about his mistress's background, from her real name to her workplace. A few days ago, I negotiated with your mistress. I showed her the photos and said if she provided testimony and evidence favorable to us, I'd reduce the compensation fee. She handed over her phone and said, "Do whatever you want with it." My husband was flipping between his phone and the photos. He muttered things like, "So that's why." And she betrayed me. I tapped the divorce papers laid out on the table. Now, onto the main issue. With all this evidence, I could go to the police, but I don't want the father of my child to have a criminal record.
So, what then?
Sign the divorce papers. Plus, the settlement money, alimony, child support. Oh, and the savings you spent on your mistress. You'll pay that back, right?
Wait a minute. It was just a fling. Divorce just like that.
Whether it was a fling or not doesn't matter to me. You betrayed your family. You inflicted trauma on our daughter. You tried to end my life. After all that, thinking you could get away with it is delusional. As I said that, my husband collapsed to his knees. Just as I thought that, he grabbed my leg, glaring at me fiercely.
It's your fault for being such a charmless woman. Did you really think I'd just return everything quietly?
My husband raised his fist. I pursed my lips, stared him down, and pulled out my phone, holding it up to his face. I've been on the phone the whole time since I entered the house.
What?
His fist froze. As his grip loosened, I quickly stood up and gathered the documents I brought. The person on the other end of the phone is my father and my lawyer. They're waiting just around the corner, ready to come in at any moment.
No, that's not. It's different.
I've been recording all as well, so I'll use it as evidence. From now on, we'll communicate through my lawyer. My husband, lost for words, slumped down as I left the house with my belongings. I got into the car where my father and the lawyer were waiting, sighed, and then called my mother, who was looking after my daughter. My daughter cheerfully greeted me on the phone.
Mom? Did you finish talking with Dad?
Yay, Emily, I'm sorry. I talked to him, but it turns out we can't live with your dad anymore. Her reply was silence. Guilt for taking her father away from my little daughter hit me, even though I had resolved myself. Sorry, Emily, that. Well.
Mom, it's okay. I understand. I'll be here for you.
Her words enveloped me softly, making the back of my nose tingle. Tears welled up, and my father beside me offered support. Later, we got divorced. The apartment we lived in was sold due to the division of assets, and I returned to my parents' house. My ex-husband, jobless and unable to afford a lawyer, couldn't pay the agreed amount and ended up begging his parents for help. His parents were furious with him. My in-laws paid a compensation and other expenses he owed me in full as an apology. Afterward, he tried to cling to his mistress, who quickly discarded him. Unable to find a decent job, he now leads a difficult life filled with odd jobs, as I heard from my in-laws. Meanwhile, I began a new life with my parents and daughter at their home. Emily stopped making her mysterious comments after moving but made good friends at her new school and seems happy every day. We might face many challenges ahead, but I swear, on my now empty ring finger, to raise my daughter well and ensure her happiness.
Although I married John, I've had a difficult relationship with his mother, Mary, and his son from his previous marriage, Brian. One day, through Brian, Mary invited me on a trip to Spain. Holding a faint hope that the trip might improve our relationship, I arrived on the day with some anticipation. Before boarding, after I had entrusted my wallet to Mary, she handed me a divorce form already filled out by John. A divorce paper? Why?
It's because you can't get along with Brian and me. John always complained about you.
He's sick of it.
Mary mocked my stunned expression, and walked to the boarding gate with my wallet in hand. In disbelief, I stared at the divorce papers and my eyes widened. This handwriting is Brian's. A fierce anger welled up inside me.
I'll have fun with the real family. The fake mom can sleep outside.
To Brian's mocking, I responded with a forced smile. Sure. I've been holding back and enduring it because they are John's family, but no more. I'll make them regret trampling over my feelings. My name is Victoria, and I'm a 50-year-old housewife. While working as a florist, I used my flower coordination certification to take on decorating event venues and wedding reception halls. I divorced 10 years ago due to my husband's infidelity and thought I was done with marriage, but I met John, who runs an event company, 3 years ago and remarried after a year of dating. Unlike my former husband, John isn't great at small talk and struggles with social smiles, but he is sincere and serious. For me, who lost both my parents, he is a reassuring and important presence. I cherish these happy days, but there's one thing that bothers me. My stepson, Brian, still hasn't opened up to me. Of course, I've tried in my own way. As the person in charge of cooking, I was quick to learn about his food preferences, and I bought CDs of his favorite band to create common ground, even getting to know their songs well enough to sing them at karaoke. If a drama came up in conversation, I watched it too, and when I heard about an event with his favorite actor, I gifted him tickets. But it seems all my efforts have missed the mark.
Don't try to suck up to me too.
When I was told this, I was truly shocked. Suck up? I just want to get along. Then Brian grimaced deeply.
I don't plan on becoming family with you. Just leave me alone.
His dismissive tone pierced my heart like a knife. The tricky part is, Brian acts all nice to me when John is around. Thinking back to before we were married, when we went out together a few times, Brian would give me a friendly smile and chat. That's why I believed we could get along well after getting married. I was prepared that it would be difficult for Brian, who is already an adult, to call me mom, but he called me worse things when John wasn't around.
Hey, old lady. Restock the drinks in the fridge. And hey, where are my socks?
It seems he switches up the names depending on his mood.
When are you going to get the hang of our family's tastes? My late mom was a much better cook. Pretending to be a mom when you can't even cook properly is just annoying.
After being nagged so persistently, I couldn't take it anymore and asked him, Brian, if there are things I'm lacking, can you tell me? I'll try to improve. Then Brian twisted his lips into a sneer.
Figure it out yourself. You have a brain, don't you? It's because you're so stupid that you got cheated on.
And then Brian continued to taunt me as I remained silent.
You're just after Dad's money, aren't you? Dad should have chosen someone younger and prettier. I don't see what he sees in you.
Being criticized for my looks, I couldn't argue back. Though John was just an acquaintance from work and as charming as an actor, why he asked me out is still a mystery to me. Once, I overheard a conversation between Brian and his friend and found out that Brian had dropped out of college and was aimlessly drifting. Brian, I lent you $5,000 because you said it was for your training.
What? Did I say that?
You haven't told your dad that you dropped out of college, have you? You better tell him. Then Brian glared at me with disdain.
Shut up. A high school grad should just keep quiet. Listen, if you spill the beans to Dad, remember what will happen.
I wonder if Brian wants to discuss it himself? It's obvious that it would be better if Brian talks about it directly rather than me revealing it. After some deliberation, I decided not to tell John about Brian dropping out of college. I really wanted to discuss Brian's cold behavior towards me, but considering John works late every night, I didn't want to burden him with unnecessary worries, so I kept it to myself. After getting married, Brian teamed up with John's mother, Mary, who dislikes me. Mary, who lives just a 30-minute drive away, would drop by unexpectedly and criticize everything, saying the house wasn't clean enough or the meals were meager. One day, I came home from work and was surprised to find Mary cooking dinner in the kitchen. Glancing at the trash can, I saw the ingredients I had prepared that morning ruthlessly discarded. Mary brought the mac and cheese and soup to the table and began eating dinner facing Brian. Brian savored it with a delighted expression.
Grandma's mac and cheese really is the best.
Right.
Mary smiled broadly.
Victoria, why don't you learn to cook from Grandma? Then maybe you could make a decent meal.
Brian and John, poor things, having to eat lousy food every day, but leaving the care of John and Brian to just work. You really fail as a wife. John is too kind, letting you get away with it.
Oh my God, if Grandma's house were closer, I'd go there for dinner every night.
I can't understand the nerve of someone who throws away someone else's food ingredients and cheerfully badmouths others while eating dinner. Additionally, my job is part-time, not full-time, so I'm home by the evening. I handle the weekday household chores alone to support John, who is always busy. I really don't understand why Mary complains about me. Essentially, she probably doesn't like that I'm working.
I can't understand. Why did John remarry someone like her?
Was he deceived? He hasn't realized she's after his wealth.
Do you think so too? John is kind and stubborn. I suggested he marry a lady from a family suitable for a CO, but he chose his partner himself and wouldn't listen.
After complaining about me to Brian for over 2 hours, Mary left, only leaving John's portion of the dinner. Reluctantly, I was eating some ready-made dishes when Brian looked down at me with pity and smirked.
Grandma really hates you as usual.
It seems so.
Why don't you stop trying to charm Dad and make an effort to be liked by Mary?
How dare you say that after stirring things up yourself? I was astonished, but well, it's okay since Mary lives separately. The problem is Brian. Being confronted with such blatant hostility makes me feel we might never get along, which is depressing. That evening, since John was working overtime, Brian and I quietly had dinner together. After dinner, while I was cleaning up, Brian unusually started a conversation.
Hey.
What?
Grandma invited me to go on a trip to Spain. So, let's all go.
I was taken aback. Are you talking to me? It's okay for me to come along?
Yeah. Grandma said that maybe if we go on a trip, we could see different sides of each other and possibly get along better.
Brian continued, somewhat embarrassed. Mary is still actively working as the CEO of a family-owned group of companies. She is not living on a pension, but is still actively working, which probably explains why she has financial comfort. More than the invitation itself, I was pleased that Mary and Brian were showing a willingness to bridge the gap with me.
So, keep the third week of next month free.
Got it. I'll take some time off. That night, when John came home from work, he sounded disappointed as he spoke.
I've got a business trip to France that week.
Then maybe I should decline.
You should go ahead. I might be able to stop by Spain on my way back and at least have a meal together.
That's nice, but you've been quite busy. Are you getting enough rest? Expressing my concern, John smiled kindly.
I'm fine, thanks.
John knows that Mary dislikes me.
I'm surprised that Mom invited you on the trip. She's stubborn and can be harsh. but maybe she really wants to get along with you, Victoria. Normally, she wouldn't want to travel with someone she dislikes.
With that line, I made up my mind. Let's get along with Mary and Brian in Spain. Hopefully, our past tensions will turn into laughable stories as we close the distance between us. On the day of our trip to Spain, Brian and I went to the airport with John. After seeing John off on his direct flight to Charles de Gaulle Airport, we waited in the lobby for a while until Mary appeared, pulling her suitcase. When I thanked her for inviting us on the trip, Mary smiled brightly.
Victoria, why don't you give me your wallet to keep it safe? You might lose it.
What?
You won't need it. I'll handle all the shopping in Spain. Look, Brian too.
Okay.
Brian handed his wallet to Mary, so I reluctantly took out my long wallet and entrusted it to her. Mary opened my wallet and nodded with satisfaction.
As expected, you brought credit cards and cash. Tourists are easy targets for pickpockets.
It seems so. Thank you. After putting my wallet in her bag, Mary exchanged a sly look with Brian. I felt a sense of unease seeing their expressions.
Also, this. John asked me to give this to you. Can you open it here?
As I opened the envelope Mary handed to me, I felt bewildered. The moment I took out the contents, I felt like my breath stopped. A divorce paper? Why? Mary's face lit up with a triumphant smile.
It's because you can't get along with Brian and me. John always complained about you.
I heard it too. He's sick of being around you.
I felt like collapsing to my knees.
So, you're no longer needed. Goodbye.
Wait, my wallet. Ignoring my plea as if she couldn't hear me, Mary quickly walked away, pulling her suitcase. I can't believe it. The kind and sincere John was talking behind my back with Mary and Brian. As I stared at the filled-out divorce form, my eyes suddenly widened. This handwriting is Brian's. It resembles John's, but has its unique quirks. My feeling of devastation suddenly turned into fierce anger. I was a fool to trust these two. I was so eager to get along through this trip.
Too bad, you poor thing. This might be your last chance ever for an international trip.
With a snide smile, Brian blurted out,
I'll have fun with the real family. The fake mom can sleep outside.
To Brian's mocking, I responded with a forced smile. Sure. I glared at Brian's back until he disappeared into the crowd. I've been holding back and enduring it because they are John's family, but no more. I'll make them regret trampling over my feelings. Although left penniless at the airport, I had no intention of succumbing to Mary and Brian's harassment. I used the transit app on my cell phone to catch a train and calmly made my way home. Brian used to bike to college, and Mary only uses her phone for messages and calls, so they must have forgotten about this. Once home and my anger slightly subdued, I made a call to someone. Afterward, I sat blankly on the sofa for a while. It's unfortunate I couldn't go on the trip to Spain, but if I really want to, I can go anytime. Besides, it wouldn't have been fun with such spiteful people anyway. I comforted myself and spent the day relaxing, reading books, and watching dramas online. Thinking about it, this was the first time since getting married that I've been alone. Usually, even if John is away on business, Brian is around, and Mary makes unexpected visits, so someone is always at home. Though the trip fell through, having a week to myself without having to see Brian or Mary feels like a luxurious vacation in its own right. The next day, after finishing my chores early, I went out to watch a movie and enjoyed some shopping at the mall on my way back. In the afternoon, while I was drinking coffee and watching TV at home, my phone suddenly rang. I had a feeling it would be soon. Annoyed at picking it up right away, I ignored it for a while, but the message tones kept sounding one after another. Reluctantly answering, I was yelled at by Brian.
Old lady, get to Spain now.
What? Don't be ridiculous.
Is that the TV? Are you at home? How can you get back if Grandma stole your wallet and cards?
I have a transit app installed on my phone. It has my credit card too, so honestly, I'm not really struggling.
Gosh, whatever. Just get over here.
What happened? When I asked, Brian said roughly.
I made reservations at a 3-star restaurant at the hotel, but they won't let us in.
Really? Why is that? I asked him deliberately.
That damn owner said, if Victoria isn't accompanying you, we must decline your patronage.
So, you missed out on the filet mignon steak? That's too bad. The view from the 36th floor is spectacular, and the meat is tender and delicious, I said to Brian, laughing as he raged on. Brian seemed unable to contain his anger.
Even when we tried going to other stores in the hotel, the clerks turned us away at the door. The hotel staff were whispering in Spanish, and it was incredibly uncomfortable. So, we ended up just going to a supermarket outside and had juice and snacks for dinner.
There's a supermarket outside the hotel, right?
You know it well.
Brian muttered suspiciously, then quickly flared up again.
Damn it. Why do I have to eat this kind of food after coming all the way to Spain? Grandma got so angry, her blood pressure soared and she had to lie down. It's all your fault.
Sorry about that. It made no sense why it would be my fault, but to avoid further hassle, I apologized.
Since it's your fault, you should compensate us for the hotel and meals. It's only fair since you made us feel bad.
I laughed in disbelief. Sure.
Really? Yes.
But only if you return the $5,000 you borrowed from me. Please do that before I file the divorce papers. Oh, looks like even if I add the hotel and meal expenses, there'll be some change left over. Brian suddenly fell silent. No doubt, he intended to default on his debt to me amidst the divorce confusion. Of course, I have no intention of divorcing at all. After a brief silence, Brian spat out with venom.
Just give me the $5,000 as a gift. You are so stingy. This is why poor people stay poor.
He was ranting as much as he wanted. At this point, I was almost amused beyond being angry. Then, I heard Mary's voice from behind Brian.
Brian, are you talking to Victoria?
Yes, Grandma. If you have something to say to her, better say it before the divorce. We won't be seeing her much longer.
Let me have the phone. Victoria, was your maiden name Smith?
Mary asked with a tense voice. Yes, that's right. I had been expecting this question.
So, are you perhaps the daughter of the Smith group?
Yes, my brother took over, so it's strange to call me the daughter now. There was a shriek from the other end of the line. It seemed like Mary almost fainted, and I could hear Brian panicking.
Grandma, what's wrong? If you're feeling ill, you should rest.
No, I'm fine. So that's why we got reservations at the popular restaurant so easily.
Mary muttered in shock.
The Smith Group, that's the chain known for catering to celebrities, right? It's very popular even overseas.
After a pause, Brian yelled.
What? Victoria is a Smith Group's daughter.
Seems so.
What? I didn't know that. Were you hiding it? What a nasty character.
I responded coolly to Brian's rants. That's strange. I mentioned it during the pre-marriage introduction. John definitely knows.
Really, did you? I've been so forgetful lately.
They probably never paid proper attention to what I said. I added, "My father was the president of Smith before he passed away. I inherited his estate, so I have never been in need of money. I didn't marry John for his money."
Oh, really? Then why do you even work at a flower shop? You could live on John's earnings alone. A wife should quit her jobs and devote herself to her husband and children.
That's right. Well, then I'll take the $5,000 after all. I should have asked for more money from someone rich like you. I missed a chance.
Despite being shocked to learn about my background, Mary and Brian quickly recovered and reverted to their usual tones, showering me with snide remarks. "I will be asking for the money I lent to Brian back. That's a separate matter, right?"
You haven't filed the divorce papers, have you?
"Well, not yet."
Then, invest $1 million in our company.
I was speechless. What?
A wife should be able to do that much. It's pocket change for you.
I can't do that. Even if I had the money, I wouldn't give it. Mary, whining to get her way, then snapped at me harshly when I firmly refused.
What a stingy woman. Don't you want to be useful at all? Poor John. It's sad he married someone like you.
Mary began to rant nonsensically.
Fine. When John arrives in Spain tonight, I'll fill his ears with all sorts of bad things about you. It would be good for you to be despised and hated by kind John and get a divorce.
I'll make up some stories too. If I say you bullied me, Simple Dad will probably believe it.
Brian added gleefully to Mary.
If you won't give us the money, we don't need a presumptuous wife like you. I'll tell John you wrote the divorce papers yourself. A serious guy like him gets scary when he's mad. I'm looking forward to tonight.
No need to wait until tonight. I've been listening right here.
John then spoke over the phone, and the two were silenced.
What, John? Weren't you supposed to join us after your business trip? Why are you back in the US?
You said you were working until yesterday and would arrive in Spain tonight.
In response to Mary and Brian's panic, John answered,
I was surprised when Victoria sent me the image of the divorce papers, so I called back immediately. I was skeptical after hearing about it, so I hurried to finish my work and flew back to listen to the conversation between Victoria, Mom, and Brian.
What? Dad, you're misunderstanding something. Grandma and I were the ones being mistreated by Victoria.
John dismissed Brian's calmer tone outright.
It's too late for excuses. I've been listening to the conversation on speaker the whole time. Who's really the terrible one here?
Gosh, it's Victoria's fault for provoking us. What? We even prepared the divorce papers out of kindness.
Wait, by the way, you two are returning tomorrow, right? I've informed the police.
Police? Why? We haven't done anything wrong.
The divorce papers, Brian. You filled out John's section, right? That's forgery of a sealed private document. You'll be arrested for that. Startled by my statement, the two began accusing each other over the phone.
Hey, Grandma. I wouldn't have done it if I knew I'd be arrested. What are you going to do about this?
What? I have nothing to do with this. It was Brian who planned and executed this mean trick on Victoria.
What? Don't mess with me.
Brian yelled at Mary over the phone.
The conversation isn't over yet. Mom, Brian quit college on his own and was spending a lot at nightclubs. And you not only turned a blind eye, but also gave him pocket money, right?
Yes, that's right. What's wrong with giving my dear grandson Brian some money?
That's right. That's right.
Brian chimed in as Mary brazenly admitted it. John then coldly stated,
It's fine to give pocket money, but it's a serious crime if you embezzled funds from the company.
What? That's bad.
Brian seemed to pale over the phone.
Look, I'm just a figurehead president. The salary isn't much.
Give me a break. If you do that, I might lose my chance to take over Dad's company, right?
Brian lamented, to which John declared,
That's off the table. I'm going independent.
After a pause, Brian exclaimed,
Hey, that's not what we agreed on. You said I'd take over after I graduated.
Who was it that dropped out after just 1 year?
Damn it. All right, I'll enroll in another school and really study this time. So keep your promise and let me take over the business.
Do you really think I'd entrust my company to someone who spews abuse at Victoria?
Looking at John's profile filled with anger, I felt a warmth in my chest. John was the only one on my side. It felt like all the days I endured their verbal abuse were finally being rewarded.
I'm going to start a new company and cut ties with you too.
Mary's scream could be heard over the phone. Seizing the phone from Brian, Mary ranted quickly.
John, you're joking, right? Are you really going to value Victoria over your own mother and son? That's absurd. You'll regret this. Please reconsider.
If I consider how you and Brian have treated Victoria, it seems only fair. You two don't care about me. You're just dazzled by the profits I could generate.
John spoke sternly to Mary.
Victoria, who isn't even blood related but cares for me, means much more to me than such a family.
Wait, don't hang up. I'll make sure Brian pays back the money he owes Victoria. Just don't abandon me.
John hung up in the middle of the conversation and immediately blocked Mary's phone number and messages.
Victoria, ignore any messages from those two.
Well, yeah. Are we really cutting ties? As I asked anxiously, John affirmed with conviction.
It's okay. Like I told Mom earlier, I have no intention of getting along with Brian or her after how they've treated you. I'm sorry for making you endure all this. I was too wrapped up in work, making it hard for you to talk to me, right?
No, it's okay. From now on, I'll support you even in the parts Mary and Brian were supposed to. Then, John smiled gently at me. After returning to the States, Mary and Brian planned to stay in a hotel for a while to evade the police. However, John informed the police about their favorite hotel, and they were quickly arrested. This time, since I hadn't submitted the forged documents to the authorities, the charges were only attempted forgery of a sealed document, and being their first offense, they were just sternly warned and sent home. However, the news of their arrest spread in the neighborhood, and Mary, who cares deeply about public perception, became too embarrassed to go outside. Moreover, because she embezzled company funds, she was removed from her position as chairperson during the trip and is now unemployed. When relatives visited Mary's house, they found her confined in a dim room, wearing filthy pajamas, which is a far cry from her fashionable past. Brian, having been kicked out of the house, was also discovered to have borrowed money not only from Mary, but from several relatives to fund his nightlife. With the relatives now aware that John had cut ties with them, and fearing being defrauded, they demanded immediate repayment from Brian. To prevent him from escaping, one relative allowed him to live at their house and made him work doing odd jobs at their business. They withhold his salary to ensure his debts are paid, as he would likely spend it otherwise. Now unable to visit his favorite nightclubs and under constant surveillance by his relatives, Brian is in a prickly situation. At work, he is bossed around by employees younger than him. Meanwhile, John, as he declared, started his own company with a few trusted colleagues. I continue to work at the flower shop and occasionally use my flower arrangement skills for decorating venues. At one point, my reputation for good taste led to being invited to decorate venues for John's business partners. It makes me incredibly happy to think that my work contributes to enhancing the image of John's company. Going forward, I look forward to supporting John and continuing my work with pride, side by side.
Are you heading over to Mary's place again today? That's a lot for you. Just as I finished work, I got a call from my husband, Tom. I'm Betty. I'm a 40-year-old stay-at-home mom with a 9-year-old son, Jake, with my husband, Tom.
Yeah, well, she's my mom. She suddenly called today, saying she needed some help.
For the past year or so, Tom has been stopping by his hometown about 3 times a week after work. His dad passed away the year before last, so now his mom, Mary, lives alone, and her health isn't the best. Being the oldest son, Tom has been the one to help her out whenever she needs it. Do you want me to come help? I can make dinner or something.
You've got to take Jake to soccer, right? I'll be fine on my own.
Jake loves soccer and goes to practice at a sports club a bit of a drive away 3 times a week, and I'm in charge of driving him there and back. Yeah, that's true, but I still feel bad for leaving everything to you all the time.
Well, you handle everything with Jake, so thank you.
Tom also visits Mary a few times a month on weekend nights. I'm usually busy too, as Jake often has soccer games or events on weekends, and he likes to do extra practice, so I take him to a training field. I appreciate that Tom willingly takes care of Mary since it's hard for me to be there. But even though I can't visit, I try to help out financially, managing our tight budget to send Mary about $500 each month.
Mom said Betty doesn't have to come to help because she's busy with Jake.
I know, but still. Tom usually handles the phone calls. Because of that, I haven't spoken to Mary in over a year. Especially since Jake started soccer, we haven't talked at all. The club practice lasts at most 90 minutes, but it takes about 30 minutes to drive to the training field. It's a bit inconvenient to go back home in between. Luckily, my parents' place is only about 10 minutes from the club, so I stop by there, use their kitchen to make dinner, and head home with Jake afterward. After that, I quickly get Jake to eat, help him with his homework, and get him in the bath. By then, I'm exhausted, and we both fall asleep right away. Tom usually gets back from Mary's house around midnight, so our schedules rarely overlap. Is Julie not coming to help? Tom has an older sister, Julie, who's married with 2 kids and lives in the same city as Mary.
Julie's busy too. I guess her kids have piano lessons, tutoring, and all that.
The back and forth for activities is really a lot.
Why don't we send Jake to tutoring too? Not just soccer.
Tom suggested it casually, but it made me widen my eyes. It'd be too much for both our time and our budget.
Yeah, fair enough.
Tom chuckled and hung up. Since I was already busy myself, I didn't think twice about what he said. I've never experienced any kind of harassment or pressure from Mary as a mother-in-law. She's genuinely a kind person. She never interferes in my parenting, but she helps out in subtle ways and absolutely adores Jake. She's also a great cook, and she'd often make us a feast on weekends. But lately, she hasn't been feeling well and apparently can't cook at all anymore. So I don't mind sending her the extra money. Actually, with Tom regularly visiting and updating me, I felt reassured. Then one day, something unusual happened. Mary called me directly on my cell phone.
Betty, it's been a while. I have something important to talk about. Could you come by whenever you can?
Mary's voice sounded tense and different from what I remembered, which surprised me. I wonder what's going on at this hour. I felt a sense of unease. Tom was away on a rare overnight business trip, leaving Mary alone tonight. Is she in some kind of trouble? Since Jake didn't have practice that day, I told her I'd come over right away, grabbed Jake, and rushed to her house. When we arrived, Mary led Jake into the living room.
Jake, why don't you watch some TV? Betty, please come with me.
She then took me to another room. As I stood there, wondering if I should offer flowers to Tom's father's portrait, Mary suddenly apologized.
I'm so sorry. I feel bad for you, Betty, but I can't provide any more support. I'm living on my savings too.
I was so shocked I couldn't find any words. Mary, please stop. I managed to say. Support? What are you talking about?
The money I've been sending to cover expenses for your parents. I've been giving you about $500 a month, sometimes $1,000 through Tom.
What? We're the ones sending $500 a month.
Wait, really? Then, what's going on?
Both Mary and I were left utterly confused, with question marks swirling in our minds. Mary sighed.
It was about a year ago. Tom told me that your father had been hospitalized with cancer and that things were tough for you.
I heard the opposite from Tom, that you were unwell and needed financial support, and he's supposed to be visiting you to help at least 3 times a week?
Tom only comes by once a month, and that's just to pick up the support money.
What? We looked at each other in shock.
So, Tom has been lying to both of us.
We began to discuss everything we'd each heard from Tom. Mary said Tom had told her about my dad's illness, claiming we were struggling financially due to the sudden burden. I was absolutely furious. Not only that, but Mary had also given money for Jake's birthday and mine. I hadn't received any of it, and this was the first I'd heard of it. If only you had asked me directly.
Tom kept saying, Betty is busy going back and forth between her parents' place and the hospital, so she can't answer the phone much. I'll pass along your messages. He would tell me you were happy and thanked me, so I believed him.
I heard from Tom that you were in poor health and often couldn't answer calls. We both let out another sigh.
So, your father isn't ill then? That's at least a relief.
I heard you were having a hard time with health issues, but you're actually well, right? I was relieved, just like Mary, to hear that.
Of course, I'm perfectly fine. It's really insulting to be made out to be sick like that.
Mary gave a wry smile. Since Tom's out for work tonight, let's ask him about this later. Mary nodded.
As it happens, the day after tomorrow is the end of the month when Tom comes to pick up the support money. We'll discuss it then. Let's keep today's conversation between us so he doesn't make any excuses.
We decided to pretend we knew nothing until then. I acted casual when I got home with Jake, but inside I was seething with anger. Still, I told myself to hold back and stay calm for now. But I just couldn't shake it, so after Jake and Tom had fallen asleep, I slipped out of bed and secretly checked Tom's phone. Tom had always used his birthday as his passcode. I entered it just to try, and the phone unlocked. He'd been so sure that neither Mary nor I knew anything, he hadn't even bothered to change the passcode. I'm going to find proof of why you've been deceiving both Mary and me out of our money. Then, at the end of the month, I waited for Tom outside his office after work and insisted on going straight to Mary's house with him.
Don't you have Jake's practice today? Are you sure you don't need to go?
It's fine. I haven't seen Mary in a while, so why not visit? Tom kept asking, but I brushed him off. I'd already arranged for my parents to take care of Jake's pickup, and he was excited to show off to his grandparents. If we got back late, he'd stay the night with them. I didn't want him hearing any of this. Good evening. I rang Mary's doorbell.
Look, I can handle this by myself. Why don't you go to Jake's practice or, take some time for yourself?
Tom was throwing every excuse he could think of to keep me from going inside. He must have been worried his lies would be exposed if Mary and I talked directly. Tom, don't tell me you don't want me seeing Mary. I played innocent and gave him a little jab, which made him start making excuses.
No way, of course not. I just thought you might want a break.
He was visibly sweating. The more I saw how nervous he was, the angrier I got. This timid man had been lying to both me and Mary all this time.
I'm glad Betty came too.
Mary and Julie were there to greet us.
What? Julie, you're here too?
Tom looked surprised, but Julie calmly replied,
Yes, we have something important to discuss.
Once everyone gathered in the living room, I pulled some printed photos out of my bag. Hey Tom, who's this woman you're with in these photos? The other night, while checking Tom's phone, I found multiple photos of him at some nightclub, grinning alongside a beautiful woman. And it wasn't just one picture. There were several.
This was from a business event. My coworker took these photos. But Betty, why did you go snooping and print these from my phone? There's such a thing as respect, even between family.
Really? Then what about the fact that you've been lying to us for a whole year? Isn't that disrespectful?
I wasn't lying. I told you. This was for work.
Well, I've checked the dates on these photos, and they all fall on days when you were supposedly at Mary's house. And Mary told me herself that you hardly visit her at all.
Tom, explain yourself to Betty and Mom right now.
Under the glares from Mary and me, and with Julie pressing him, Tom let out a small, startled shout. Realizing he was cornered, he began confessing everything.
About a year ago, I went to this nightclub for a business event and ended up falling for one of the hostesses.
It turns out that the beautiful woman in the photos was a hostess at that club. Tom, smitten, had been visiting the club often, showering her with gifts and paying for meals, just as she wanted. Normally, if he'd been drinking, I would have noticed the smell, but Tom doesn't drink. He only ever has water, so there was no scent of alcohol, and I didn't suspect a thing. This is unbelievable. You were out there splurging on a woman with money you tricked out of both me and Mary, and on top of that, you lied about each of us being sick. I couldn't forgive him for betraying Mary's genuine concern for my family and for deceiving me all this time.
Tom, don't you have a heart? You took money from Mom, who's living off her savings, and lied to Betty too. How shameless can you be?
Well, I just slipped up a bit. I was looking for a little excitement. That's all.
Tom, are you saying you spent over $20,000 of the money I gave you just for that?
Mary looked as if she was about to cry. I felt all affection for him drain away. Just for excitement? A moment of weakness? Are you saying life with Jake and me is that boring? In its place, a fierce anger burned inside me.
No, that's not it. But, you know, every day is the same. I just wanted a little thrill, some harmless fun.
This so-called ordinary life is what happiness is. Don't you understand how precious these peaceful days are, Tom? I was so angry, tears started to fall. The more excuses he gave, the more disillusioned I felt.
Why are you so mad? I still love you the most, Betty. So isn't that good enough? I wasn't planning on breaking up our family.
It's not good enough. My voice was joined by those of Mary and Julie.
Tom, you're just too selfish. I don't think of you as my son anymore.
Mary shook her head.
You're really an embarrassment. I'm cutting ties with you as a sibling.
I can't stay with you either. I'm done. Let's get divorced.
What? Am I really that bad? I only lied once to go to a hotel for work. And it's not like I don't know she isn't serious about me.
With Mary and Julie disowning him and me declaring divorce, Tom's face turned pale. And yet, he still hadn't apologized, which made it clear just how hopeless he was. You lied, took money from Mary and me, fooled around with another woman, and now say you didn't want to break up the family? Do you hear yourself? I snapped at Tom.
They say cheating is like a sickness, and liars don't change. So, Tom, you're incurable, which means divorcing you is the right choice for Betty, and cutting ties with you is the right choice for us.
Where did I go wrong raising you? But you're a grown man now, so go on and live your life alone.
Mary looked down sadly. Julie put an arm around her, gently comforting her mother. I firmly confronted Tom with the facts he didn't know. Listen, Mary apologized to me, saying, I'm sorry, but I can't provide any more support. Are you not ashamed for putting your mom in that position? You trampled on both my trust and Mary's feelings. You've done something that can never be undone. And yet, you still haven't apologized at all. Hearing this, Tom finally seemed to grasp the weight of his actions. He slumped down on his knees, defeated. After that, Jake and I moved back to my parents' house. I wanted nothing more to do with Tom, so I handled everything through a lawyer, filing for alimony, child support, and an additional claim for the funds I had sent to Mary. We sold our house, and he paid the full amount in one go. Tom moved into some apartment alone, living by himself in solitude. With no money to spend, he couldn't go to the nightclub anymore and was apparently dumped by that woman. Jake was initially surprised by the sudden divorce, but he was thrilled to be closer to his soccer club now that we're at my parents' place, where he gets to practice more often. My ties with Tom may be completely cut, but since that incident, Mary and Julie and I have become quite close. As dear friends, we still keep in touch, and they're both planning to come watch Jake's soccer game next week. With my parents coming too, we're all excited to cheer Jake on together.